It's good to be back at MBA. A few years back, Harlan called me when he was teaching at another school, and he said, remember that march when I was 6 years old, that suffrage march, you made me go march in? And I go, oh yeah. And he says, well, I checked our history book, and there's no reference to women getting the vote, the 19th Amendment. Send me some materials. And I was really pretty pleased about that. This is a story that is pivotal and dramatic, and it's rarely told. But Harlan has checked your history book for me at MBA, and I am glad to tell you that there's a reference to this not once, but twice. So you all are in good shape. You know, it was a fight to secure the vote, and it was really a fight. It was a struggle, and it almost did not become a reality. And Americans' women's demand for the vote was once thought crazy, subversive, and impossible. And over a 70-year fight and struggle, it transformed into the Constitution. And the story of the 19th Amendment is the story of the largest extension of the franchise in our nation's history. 27 million women got the vote. And think what it'd be like if you and your dad could go vote, but your mother and your sister could not. That was the landscape in 1920. Now, as we know, women were not included when the Founding Fathers constructed our Constitution. The iconic phrase, "we the people," did not originally include women. And the Declaration of Independence truly espoused all men are created equal. And in that case, generally, it was white men with property. And after the Civil War, the enactment of the 14th Amendment in 1868, which is the Equal Protection Clause under the law, it did not give women the vote. And 2 years later, in 1870, the 15th Amendment, giving all men, including African Americans, the right to vote, women were specifically excluded again. And it took 50 years, a half a century later, for women to win the right to vote with the 19th Amendment, which simply stated, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States of America or the states on account of sex. And although we didn't hear much about it and still don't, the fight for women's suffrage is one of the defining civil rights struggles in our nation's history. And the debate was not just about politics, it was about society and our cultural and the moral debate still about the role of women continues till today. And today it's hard to imagine how difficult and how brave the women were to stand up publicly for the right to vote. She endured contempt and ridicule in her community, in her church, and in the press. She was attacked by mobs of men, denounced as a radical, a pervert, a traitor, a socialist, a bad mother, and a bad wife. She was derided as unattractive, unsexed, a she-man. There were pictures of her looking like animals, and the men who supported her were belittled. Yet the suffragists were ingenious and fearless in their quest for equal citizenship. They used methods that were still used in the civil rights movement in the 20th and the 21st century. First, the suffragists decided they'd go state by state and try to get the vote. And some states gave them full rights, some limited, and some gave none at all. So finally, in 1919, after World War I was over, the federal 19th Amendment to give all women in every state, in every election, the right to vote was passed by Congress and sent to the states to ratify. In the summer of 1920, one last state was needed to ratify. 35 states had ratified. 36, or 3/4 of the 48 states in the Union at the time, were required, and 8 states had already rejected. And at the time when state legislatures did not meet regularly, the anti-suffragist governors in Vermont and Connecticut would not call a special session. So that left North Carolina, Florida, and Tennessee. From those 3 southern states, Tennessee was the best and last hope. Suffragists had hoped to avoid relying upon the South. Tennessee was a dangerous place to stage the definitive battle. And why was Tennessee so dangerous? And although the suffrage movement grew out of the abolition of slavery, the movement was definitely not free of racism. Nearly all the southern states had already rejected the amendment with a racist rationale. The states did not want black women to vote. In these days and times, it is shocking to read how easily and freely legislators and antis stated this rationale. And still reeling from the Civil War, southern states were about states' rights and not wanting the federal government to tell a state what to do. And additionally, religious forces were in play. Some clergymen believed that women voting went against the will of God. Women were subservient to men, and women had no place outside the home. Politicians feared an unpredictable, huge, new voting bloc. Corporations believed women would be bad for business. The textile manufacturers feared women voters might want to abolish child labor, and the mills relied on the cheap labor of women and children. The liquor industry feared that women voters would insist on strict enforcement of the new liquor prohibition laws. And the railroad lobby, a huge force in Tennessee politics, had already cultivated its legislators and didn't know who these new voters would elect and what their allegiances would be. So, all sides confront one another in Nashville in August 1920 in what has been called the War of the Roses. Suffragists wore yellow roses and antis wore red roses. And that women opposed their own enfranchisement is shocking to many. But some of these antis were sophisticated, well-educated women, and many antis feared that suffrage would bring about a profound, unhealthy shift in gender roles, endanger the American home, and bring about the moral collapse of our nation. Both sides are housed in the Hermitage Hotel, downtown Nashville, which is called the third branch of the legislature. And as a sign of the times, women could not enter the hotel lobby without a man. If they came alone, they had to take the side door. Quickly, after the legislature is convened on August the 9th, the Senate overwhelmingly passes the amendment 25 to 4. Now, as the Suffs say, we have 35 and a half states have passed, of the 36 have passed the amendment, but the House is very much in doubt. Speaker Seth Walker, 28 years old, who was originally for suffrage, abruptly changes his mind as the session opens. The outcome of the House remains in doubt until the very last moment on August 18, 1920. A motion to table consideration of the 19th Amendment so as to avoid legislators having to vote for or against the amendment thereby fails 48 to 48. But that meant if the votes were the same, a majority of the legislators would not vote for the amendment and it would fail. So emboldened with this tie vote, Speaker Walker is ready now for the vote and calls for a vote either up or down on the 19th Amendment. Now, the time has come. Over 70 years fighting for the vote. Everything comes down to what happens here in Nashville in the House chambers with galleries stuffed with Suffs and antis and everyone, including legislators, wearing red or yellow roses. It comes down to a single vote of conscience. The youngest member of the House, Harry Byrne, was from McMinn County, the home of Coach Ronnie McMahon. Yay! Representative Byrne had told everyone he was voting against suffrage and wore a red rose. He had voted to table the amendment, but then when his name is called, he votes for instead of against suffrage, and both sides in the House chamber and its galleries erupt and rock with excitement and dismay. The 19th Amendment of the United States Constitution passes because of that one vote. Later, when asked why he changed his vote, he cited a letter from his mother, Phoebe, encouraging him to give women the vote. And think about this. There was no phone, no texting. She wrote that letter, mailed that letter, and thank goodness her letter got there in time. All this took place almost a century ago, but there are many modern themes for today. The fight for the vote was one that cuts to the heart of what democracy means. Who gets to participate, and who gets a voice? And the fight for the vote deals with topics which dominate our headlines now: voting rights, voting suppression, women's rights, inequality, dark money in politics, the role of religion in public policy, and racism, because the history of suffrage in America is inevitably a story about race. Most importantly, I ask you to think about Harry Byrne, the youngest member of the House, 25 years old, voting his conscience with the galleries full and the nation watching. You will have moments in your life when you will find yourself in a position to make a big impact. You will be asked to take a stand that will make you uncomfortable. It might not be 27 million people getting to vote, but these decisions will affect a few or many. You are attending a school that gives you tools to know when it is right to take a stand, and people may or they may not be watching. Ask yourself, will you have the courage to do the right thing? Could you have done what Harry Byrne did? Thank goodness he did. Never think your vote does not make a difference. It does. Thank you.